All right, so the cavity packing method is something that's very useful and more common in some markets and in some museums than others. It can be pretty simple down and dirty, or it can be very sophisticated. There are some limitations to it, but they can be overcome by using a few of the techniques that we're going to talk about next. So we'll go ahead and cover the feature about how generally you attach the foam to the lid. First thing you do typically is you want to invert the normal way you do a lid, where it goes like this, because obviously you want full coverage. So basically, this is not hard. You just do it in place. It's the same way to do it, to where you're not going to mess anything up. You're going to just shoot a bead of glue around here. One of the things you're going to do, though, is you're going to come away from the edge a bit. That'll leave you, if you wanted to, say, cover it in Tyvek, that leaves you a space to tuck it. So basically, we're going around the edge, we're squiggling, we're putting that down. It's registering right where we want it. And then we're going to basically cut it in place. Like that. So when we do the other, it'll be evenly divided in half. Do it the same way. So that's already kind of slick. You don't have to do this. You can just have a loose piece of foam on top if you're doing a down and dirty version. On any of these, though, what you want to do is, just like we've done with cutting other things, if you're using a box size, and it's the same way to do it is just cut a piece of plywood to the size of that box and use that as a template just to knock them out. You don't want to be measuring, marking, cutting with these things. So that gives us a really nifty little start right there. All right, so we're not doing this whole box because we don't have the time, for obvious reasons. Since I left this top where it's not glued all the way around, it means I can come in here and just do some tucking. For our lid. Now this is obviously, the more stuff you do like this, the more it's resembling a traveling exhibition kind of version, but it's nice to see. So we're just going to do a little version too. So since I said this could be a place where we'd want to shoot a bead up on this edge up here and here, and it's easy, fast. So there you can see it's like we've got our objects, they fold down, they get taped. In another example, say, there are aids that can come to help us out, that if you're doing a high volume and small objects, you can utilize basically cutting aids. I mean, you can't just cut squares. As long as you're just isolating objects, and you're not being that fancy. You can cut squares, you can cut circles, which can even be nicer. And these are ones that is a packer's trick to take tin cans, food cans, and just cut out the bottom and use a grinder and sharpen them. They'll make beautiful even circles, and it goes relatively quickly. Big thing with these is just getting them started. So there's a nice circle, and here again, if you wanted to just do that, boom, it's done. So you can do a whole layout of these and wrap it up and get out of there. So here what we have is something that looks kind of slick, actually. If you look at it, it's like each object looks like it's all upholstered and all beautiful and nifty. But really, it's fairly crude. It's basically the contours are very rough cut. and as is the upholstery, in the sense that you're not having to define it with each line around each one. So this was very non-time consuming. If we look at what it actually consists of, it's just one piece of Tyvek that has been tucked into each of the cavities and then around the sides. And the cuts, in this case, I went ahead and used some of our little cutting aids. You know, in the case of the leaf container or bowl or whatever, it's just a circle, just like the other. In terms of the globe, it's just two slightly offset circles. The egg-shaped stone is just a combination of two different circles, one smaller, one larger, overlapping. And that's just like kind of instantly done. For the horse, his head kind of pokes out, so that's just a small and a larger size one. And then when we had for the little figure, we just used two small ones and then cut out that middle piece. So that's basically one nifty option to use in some cases that will impress people. Be highly functional. It'll still maintain the visibility that you are usually going for. The one disadvantage that comes up a lot is that you've got this wrinkly fabric all over, so if you're labeling individual pieces, it becomes a little problematic. Here's just a little detail that is both a follow-up on this particular method, but also will be useful in other situations. I don't know if you can tell on the camera, but this is when we did this before, it tended to be really, really poofy up here. When you're going in and out of multiple cavities, you build up a lot of extra fabric, and it can tend to bind up around the top. It just doesn't lay flat very well. And it's especially true even if you're just doing a single upholstered hole in a regular pack job. If it's deep, that means you're pushing that down and it's drawing all this fabric, and you end up with a whole lot of fabric. So one of the things you can do is what I've done here, which is to basically make extra cuts. This is especially nice for square things too, which I don't have an example of here, but where in the corners it tends to build up. What you do is you just go in, let me find a good place to do this. You go in and make extra cuts to tuck your fabric into, and that keeps it a little tauter. So if I pull that out, you can see how much is tucked in. And all that is you just make a series of cuts that are excess to tuck away the fabric. Obviously, you want to make sure you don't weaken it if there's anything super structural, but typically you don't have a problem. It's all contained. It's relatively lightweight stuff. Often you'll come across things that you want to hold down, and the part sticking up is not what you want to use to hold it down. You want to hold down another part. So on this one we have an antler that I'm saying has a red mineral pigment on parts of it, and we don't want to hold it there or lift it there. But then if we don't, what's going to hold that in place? And lots of times the things that you want to contact the least are the best places to lift it. So where in many situations where you want to put your little lifting holes, that's also where you want to hold it. It's like a contradiction. And one option is to go ahead and fit the foam on top that will hold it down and sideways. And then basically you get it all lined up, you get it all fitted, and then you shoot some glue on top and fold that down on top of it. Then that will register on the top. This can be cut here, and this can all be tucked with the soft wrap, and it'll look really nifty. Lots of times you don't have something this complex. You may just have a simple kind of bump that goes in there. One thing you do have to be aware of is When this swings, if it's totally straight up and down here, it's going to want to catch. So you have to trim this top part. This little guy here, though he's going to be really hard for you to see, maybe we should do a detail, has friable fragment all over, and the only place that you can touch this thing is around the base there and right where these sleeves are. The cuffs below you can't, the top of the garment you can't, and that's just hard to do. And normally if you think about carving foam, very time consuming, very hard to get right, and just when you think you're going to get it right, you overdo it. And it's like, well, great, so am I going to add back little pieces? It can be very time consuming, and it doesn't have to be that way. Especially what you can do, there's no rule that says you can't use two different foams, and especially a stiffer foam going with the softer foam can make a lot of sense. So these are just places where I figured out where I wanted to contact them, and then you just cut little pieces of foam. The nice thing about that is you cut them and they're in a slot to where if this were covered in plastic, that high density, you could literally slide it right over to contact the piece. Okay, there's a little gap back here. Do I care? Not really, because I'm going to shoot. This is another reason we like this 3M glue gun is it has a little tip that will go inside. You can shoot glue down inside there, so it won't build up all over the top, and lock that in place. The only thing you do if you're doing additive method instead of subtractive, the only thing you definitely want to look out for though is that when these contact it, they have to have a slight backward slope. It's really easy to get in there and lock it in place with this, but if it's perpendicular, it could rub on the way in and out. And if it's leaning over, you could actually trap it. You don't want someone having to cut something out. Another thing, I don't know why, but it seems like I come across it a lot, are very flat things that need to go in with these other things. And half the time, for me, it's metal, but other times it may be documents. And especially documents that are not matted, or drawings that aren't matted, that they go in a display case. I mean, they make sense in the case. But when you come to pack and it's like, cavity, how do you cavity that? Well, obviously you do a similar thing in that you want it to rest down in something and you want it to be held down. And there's a couple good ways to do this. And so here's like an example of important document or unmounted work on paper that is set down in there enough that it'll keep from shifting this way, and this will hold it. And what I'll do is I'll pull this out and cut it down just a little bit, because we don't need it to be totally snug. We want it to be able to go in and out easily. So I'll trim this down a little bit, and then I'll flip this over, the lid over on top of the glue rapidly before it dries and cools, and then this will be stuck to the top. Once it's there, we could trim down the edges a little if we want to make it pretty. Put a little cut around there, straight down on the walls, and we can tuck it with Tyvek or whatever we want. I want to go ahead and point out that that was in progress. When all the details of that kind of work will be hidden when you go ahead and upholster it, if indeed that's what you're doing. So in this case, here's a nice surface to go here. In some cases you actually could, for very flat things, you could substitute a 1/4 inch Filara, on both surfaces if you want. You just have to trim that away. And of course here's the hole down here, so that basically your object's just sitting there and you can't see the blocks in here. So something to keep in mind, that you don't have to be all that concerned about the aesthetics of this other part if you're going to take it to the next step. All right, this final little illustration is of sort of the high end of packing in many ways. It's similar to some of the other stuff because it does use, it is a tuck kind of situation, and it does use batting to help fill the voids and add extra shock and vibration mitigation. But it utilizes something for the surface contact that is kind of unique and very special in that it's this Teflon material. This is thread seal tape, kind of like what you get in the hardware store, only It is unslit. It comes on a kind of bulk roll. You buy it by the pound. And of course it's very, very soft. It's stretchy. It's as unabrasive a material as you can get. I mean, it is what it is, Teflon. And so that's what we're using as a contact material and to tuck in. So here you can see batting. And the one thing that is a little trick about this is that to tuck it can be hard. It tends to want to come out. And one trick is to use the batting and tuck that in first, and then it'll tend to stay better. And I'm not using my knife right now, which I normally would, to get an even line. But that'll keep it down in that little groove. And you'll notice here I've got all this nice cush around the body. I don't want to touch the antlers, so in this case what I've done is cut out the basic shape, and then cut out some more and left part of it in there. I made a cut here and left part of it in there, and then removed another 1/2 inch. So basically the antlers on this backside, they're totally float. There's no contact with it. And this way I have like super nice contact. It's absorbing any vibration, and no contact with any projecting parts of the thing. And it's exaggerated because I wanted to make that point that if there's a problem that you can have with this method, it's that you get things too tight, especially around vulnerable components. So basically, when this gets tucked in, it's very beautiful, and it's just extraordinarily soft. It's just, when a client sees that, it usually blows their mind a little bit. So that's it. All right, here I'm going to show a little detail about insetting flat things into your cavities, but also some just general useful information anytime you're working with foam. The first is that when you are doing cutting, that you need a bunch of depth. What you want is another piece of foam underneath, so your cuts can go all the way through the bottom edge. If I were cutting, I'm cutting 2 pieces at the same time here. If there was something rigid, like a cutting board underneath, it's going to go down and hit, but it's not going to go all the way through. All right, I wanted to show you one other thing about dealing with shallow items, and it could be like the document that we had before, that we wanted to inset. Could be metal plates, which for some reason I've had a lot of those, where they're fairly heavy, and there's no way you want to count on it, and staying in a little teeny groove. You need to make something deeper and have something. In this case, if you have something shallow, you might want to consider moving it up to where it's right underneath the 2-inch on top. And what that allows you to do is when you make your cut for whatever you're going to put in there, it's a very simple matter of pull out the 2-inch, and then you push it down, pull out the 1-inch, push the 2-inch back down, and you automatically have a 1-inch cavity there. Then you have a 1-inch lid. You just cut down slightly smaller so it can be glued to whatever is coming up about to a lid or whatever you're doing. Now that's for something very thin. If you do want to cut it down, I can show you a couple methods for how to slice larger things or flat things relatively evenly. So we'll do that next. All right, a nifty thing that you can do if you are so equipped, if you have one of these large knives, it's basically a roast beef slicer. It can come in very, very handy if you've used them. You come to find that out really quickly. Is to make a cut all the way across. And of course, you could do it by hand. You could try and mark it. There's normal ways to do it, but also if you do have anything to use as a shim that's fairly narrow, you can actually use that as a guide to where you basically get an even 1/2 inch, 3/4. You can double these up, get 1 inch, whatever you want to take off, and then put that in your cavity. If you're matching the thickness of the object itself with your shims.